Hello again, class. Welcome to part 2 of our Bloodchild discussion. This is the moon that we discussed on the dwarf planet Pluto. Somewhere in here is Butler's Mons. In this second part of our videos, we're here to discuss these 4 aspects of the text. Key, the Bromlomus incident, gone after the Bromlomus incident, and a theme throughout the text, which is the notion of becoming alien, power dynamics, and consent. Now, the first thing we're going to discuss is the character of Key, which I would have you remember is the brother of Gon. And what you end up having with the brother and the sister and the mother are 3 different relationships with the concept of being a Turan, and more specifically, a relationship with Tagatoi and the idea of becoming possibly an Intalik. The most important thing about Key is that he serves as a contrast with the character of Gon. And why is that? Because of his ambivalence and antagonism or resentment towards his role as a Turan living in a preserve. What's especially interesting is that Key has something happen to him which makes him so angry or ambivalent or simply not into this whole idea of being a Turan and living in harmony with Tagatoi and this joining of the families and all that stuff. As it says here, but something had happened when he reached adolescence. I never knew what. He began keeping out of Tagatoi's way. Then he began running away until he realized there was no away. And I'm going to cut down to here. When Gon asks him about it, he says, you started to run away not long after that, didn't you? Yeah, stupid. Running inside the preserve. Running inside a cage. So you have this sense that there's something that happened to him that makes him alienated, a word I'm using intentionally, from this whole notion of being inside of this preserve. And, unlike Gon, who says, I'm comfortable with it, I don't see why everyone's hesitating, Key hesitates. Key resents this whole idea of being a Turan. And again, to refer back to this slide from the first video, as we noted, Gon has always felt comfortable with Tagatoi, right? There's no hesitation in him. And he's always had this sense of familiarity with Tagatoi that has made him never question the relationship until this Bromlomus incident, which we can discuss now. Now, as you know from reading the story, Bromlomus is a Terran character who arrives at the doorstep of Gon's family in a bad way. He's sick, and essentially he's pregnant with the worm children of the Talik, and they suddenly have to be taken out. Just like if a pregnant woman was on the subway 8 months pregnant and suddenly her water broke and she was beginning to go into labor, she is in need of immediate attention. And like any good story, this is an unexpected event that has major ramifications in ways that aren't anticipated by characters like Tagatoi or Gon. And what ends up happening, of course, is that Gon is witness to this process, which he himself is expected to go through. And as I said, it was an unexpected event that Gon was not supposed to see, and as Tagatoi says here, that was bad. You should not have seen that. It need not be that way. And by that way, she means the explicit, as we all know from reading it, essentially gross exposure to a very graphic and brutal event, which is the giving birth of these alien children. So I won't read all of what you see here, but I do want to read the passage in the middle because I think it's important to know how absolutely seriously Octavia Butler, the author, decides that she wants the readers to know really what it might look like, at least in her imagination, if this was to take place. Tagatoi found the first grub. It was fat and deep and red, and it was fat and deep red with his blood, both inside and out. It had already eaten its own egg case, but apparently had not yet begun to eat its host. At this stage, it would eat any flesh except his mother's. Left alone, it would have gone on, excreting the poisons that had both sickened and alerted Lomas. Eventually, it would have begun to eat. By the time it ate its way out of Lomas's flesh, Lomas would be dead or dying, and unable to take revenge on the thing that was killing him. There was always a grace period between the time the host sickened and the times the grubs began to eat him. So again, you can imagine that if you're Tagatoy and you're trying to convince Gon, someone you've raised up to birth your children, that you don't want them to see how bad it really is. You don't want Gon to see that. So this is not something that she wanted him to see. That's why it's an incident. It's an accident that takes place that is ultimately something that informs or is the main engine behind the conflict that takes place subsequent to this incident. So what we have here are some of the excellent ways that Butler really shows the value of character development coming through sudden observation. One reason that Octavia Butler, even though she passed away a few years ago and wrote in a previous century, has become ever so more popular is that she finds ways to have very completely strange events seem familiar to us. And one way she does that is through observations such as these. So we have here Gon say, "I had hoped Brom Lomas would stay unconscious. The sound he made, I had never heard such sounds come from anything human." Tagatoy picked up the writhing grub carefully and looked at it, somehow ignoring the terrible groans of the man. So with all three of these, what you see is the sudden feeling of alienation or shock that Gon feels about something that he always thought he was cool with, right? So he sees Brom writhing whilst this operation is taking place, and all he wants is him to not know what's going on. And again, he is somebody who thinks he knows what's going on, Gon. And to wish that Brom doesn't see this is obviously him knowing that he wishes he hadn't seen what he's totally seeing right now. And this is an interesting line, right? Because he says that the sound being made by a fellow human being to him doesn't sound human. In fact, something we can get into in a little bit, it's almost as though a human sound sounds alien to him. And then Tagatoy, a character, a person, a mother-like, if not also a lover-like character, again, it's a strange story, suddenly he's looking at Tagatoy and noticing how Tagatoy is different from himself, that she can somehow ignore the terrible groans of the man, right? Terrible groans that she herself finds almost inhuman, and Tagatoy is not even reacting. So clearly, this is a different Gon than before the Brom Lomas incident. And as Key teases him in another instance, Key teases him and says, finally found out more than you wanted to know, eh? So you can get the sense that Key, who had something happen to him, might feel a certain bond or affinity with Gon now because they both have this feeling of disillusionment or sudden feelings of alienation from a project that before this they perhaps had accepted at face value. And then in this first passage, you can see Gon essentially sums up why this was such a shock to him, because he had been told all his life that this was a good, necessary thing Talik and Terran did together, right? A kind of birth, this joining of the families. I had believed it until now. I knew birth was painful and bloody, no matter what, but this was something else, something worse, and I wasn't ready to see it. Maybe I never would be, yet I couldn't not see it. Closing my eyes didn't help. So he sees something, and it changes him, and he doesn't even know how it changes him. He just knows he's different. And the difference really manifests in his relationship with Tagatoy. As he says here, what does Tehran taste like to you? And Tagatoy says nothing. What are you? I whispered. What are we to you? Clearly, her notion of a relationship with Tagatoy was one like they were equals. That, okay, you are an alien and I am a human, but I really don't see those differences like other people see those differences. And then, all of a sudden, he really sees the differences. What are you? What are we to you? And this is almost like this idea that maybe you've had in your life when somebody who you think you know very well suddenly seems altogether different to you and you don't know how to reconcile it, how to make sense of it. And then again down here, we have another example of him observing her behavior, right? Licking away the blood. Does she like that? And everything suddenly seems wrong or alien. And I wouldn't have thought anything about her could seem alien to me. You know, it's one thing if you think you have a relationship with somebody and then it changes and you no longer continue that relationship. That you're becoming alien or you're becoming like somebody else or friendly with somebody else and then it changes. But what makes this story interesting is these power dynamics exist in which Tagatoi is saying, I have to impregnate somebody tonight. And the question is, what happens when this power dynamic takes place? As we all know from reading the story, Gon eventually does agree to be impregnated by Tagatoi, and we'll review this in a bit more detail in a minute, but it's important to see how we get to this moment of consent or not consent, non-consensual implantation, and much of that has to do with this idea that the alienation has taken place. Gon suddenly doesn't see Tagatoi as the same. But there is still this power dynamic that exists between them, wherein Gon has says we are families joined together, but suddenly he senses that Tagatoi maybe has some control over not only his life, but his family's life. And throughout the story, we see these moments when Tagatoi sort of flexes her muscle, right? And you can see in these first two passages here, Tagatoi using the command verbs and saying, go out and slaughter an animal. Now I let her push me out of the kitchen. And we see these moments when the relationship switches from one of equality to one with a degree of inequality or a degree of superior and inferior that sort of makes it difficult to deal with what we mean when we say the word consent. Because that's what Tagatoi craves. She craves this to be a consensual implantation, that this decision is one that Gon makes, right? And she wants him to say yes, but there's also this idea that I will, no matter what, impregnate somebody tonight. It will either be you or your sister. I must do it to someone tonight. But Gon wrestles with this because he feels as though he's never really been asked to do this, right? And then there's an incident with a gun in which he threatens to commit suicide. And you get to the sense that finally Tagatoi claims that he is asked. And you have this sense of like, is Gon, when he finally agrees to this implantation, saying yes and it with his absolute free will? Is it completely his choice? Or does he feel coerced or forced into it? And I'll read this whole passage in a minute because I think it's important. But when I read it, what I want you to see, and this is essentially where the story concludes, Octavia Butler doesn't really answer the question. She offers up a very messy moment of intercourse between two species in which the feelings of consent are not entirely clear. So, to read it out loud, yet I undressed and lay down beside her. I knew what to do, what to expect. I had been told all my life. I felt the familiar sting, narcotic, mildly pleasant. Then the blind probing of her ovipositor. The puncture was painless, easy, so easy going in. She undulated slowly against me, her muscles forcing the egg from her body into mine. I held on to a pair of her limbs until I remembered Lomas holding her that way. Then I let go, moved inadvertently and hurt her. She gave a low cry of pain, and I expected to be caged at once within her limbs. When I wasn't, I held on to her again, feeling oddly ashamed. I'm sorry, I whispered. She rubbed my shoulders with four of her limbs. Do you care? Do you care that it's me? She did not answer for some time. Finally, you were the one making the choices tonight, Gon. I made mine long ago. Would you have gone to Hoa? So, the story ends on a question mark, much like Emperor's New Clothes. But at the end, we have a story in which a character changes after going through some struggle and makes a decision. A decision that is one that you will explore in your own paper that has to do with several different themes. Okay? And we will discuss much of this in another video. So concludes Bloodchild Part 2.